Welcome back. Already this hour, we've showed you how the president refusing to concede and the legal cases over the election piling up, plus the roadblocks the president is putting up for a peaceful transfer of power to his successor, Joe Biden. Well, my next guest just penned a piece in USA Today saying we are looking at a transition from hell and a parade of horrors, all the author's words. Norman Ornstein, he is a member of the National Task Force on Election Crisis. He's also a contributing editor for The Atlantic. Obviously, we saw with today the defense secretary being shown the door. Many people fear he's not going to be the last on, let's say, a revenge crusade of sorts here from the president. At what point is it more than petty, but really dangerous to both national security or national interests?
Remember, he's not the first, and he won't be the last. We had the deputy head of the Agency for International Development fired. All of the people in charge of the nuclear stockpile are gone, which is particularly troubling. And I have little doubt that we're looking ahead to a scorched earth that may involve a whole slew of people who deal with the pandemic, who he believes have not been sufficiently loyal to the president, along with a number of people in the intelligence world. So there are a lot of things that a president can do before leaving office after being defeated. This transition that we have in the United States is unique in the world. If you are a citizen or resident of Britain or Canada or Australia, you have an election, there's a change of government that happens overnight. We have 2.5 months with a president who's got all the powers of the presidency. And if you have one who's vindictive and petulant and refuses to acknowledge a defeat, you've got a troubled situation on your hands, and that's what we have right now.
You've heard the same names I've heard that could be on the chopping block. The FBI director, even Bill Barr, the president may not have deemed was sufficiently loyal. We can go up and down the list, Dr. Fauci, et cetera. More than, as I said, on the petty side here, how could it compromise, especially when we look globally here? You know, the one thing transitions are supposed to do is create a seamlessness to this, again, with one thing in common regardless of political party, which is national self-interest. Could either enemies here or people that are not looking in the U.S. as self-interest look at this as a vacuum they'd like to fill?
This is dangerous, especially on the defense front. It's dangerous more generally. You know, transitions are often rocky in one sense. The outgoing people are a little resentful, even if it's within the same party. But in the last 25 years or so, and in particular with the transition from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, we saw that country became the first priority. And they were done smoothly, and they were done with an understanding that the election had taken place and the voters had spoken. This is a very different phenomenon. We know that over the last 2 years at least, Donald Trump has systematically gotten rid of people inside his administration who he believed were insufficiently loyal to him, even if they were being loyal to the Constitution and their own oaths. That's now accelerating in its pace. You're right about the FBI director. We know that Trump, one of the other things you can do as a lame duck president, he's signed already some destructive executive orders, one of which enables him to dig into the protected civil service, pluck people out, put them into some special category, fire them summarily with no ability to appeal. I think this is illegal, but that doesn't mean he won't do it. And if he does it with Anthony Fauci, with Deborah Birx, with people inside the Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institutes of Health that are dealing with the pandemic, just as the pandemic worsens, that's going to be a huge problem of disruption. And then getting rid of people who are loyal to the Constitution in the Defense Department may leave him unleashed when it comes to what could be very dangerous actions abroad. There's an awful lot going on now. The fact that we have an election that has not been resolved because the president refuses to acknowledge what's happened is in some ways a smaller story than what he might do during the remaining period of time, especially if he remains in denial.
Well, we certainly have seen the president, beyond the vindictiveness, act out of self-interest consistently for the last 4 years. Talk about how pardons, would be. I mean, we'll always see a questionable pardon at the end of any administration, seemingly, but in this particular case, they could be coming fast and furious, but they don't necessarily immunize him.
No, and the pardon power in some senses is an absolute one, but we can never consider anything to be absolutely absolute. Donald Trump is very, very likely to pardon his own family, to pardon many people on his staff, to pardon a number of people in his cabinet. There have been a number of offenses that are right out there in front of us, including violations of the Hatch Act, but also corruption of different sorts and a lot of embarrassing things. And I expect a lot of pardons. A self-pardon is a much bigger question. And remember, that doesn't immunize you against state offenses. And in New York State, the Attorney General and the city's DA in New York City are deep into investigations of tax fraud and other potential crimes from before the president was in office. But there's one part of this that I find particularly troubling, and that is you go through all of this and people are going to be inclined to get rid of any of the evidence that is both incriminating and embarrassing, whether it involves actions taken on child separation and asylum seekers, or to feather the nests of cronies through no-bid contracts or self-dealing, or any of the other potential offenses. All of those phone calls that the president made to foreign leaders that they put into some kind of deep freeze to keep them from becoming public, that will then become public. And those would be violations of the Presidential Records Act and the Federal Records Act, two laws which protect evidence and documents. But what if the president pardons people in advance from violations of those laws? We have to rely on career people who know what's going on, both not to carry out illegal orders, but also to do some whistleblowing and to protect whatever they can, so that in the light of day, we're going to be able to see exactly what happened through the course of the administration.
Finally, obviously, for a person who's driven by self-interest, he may not be doing himself favors in the long run. And I say that because at the end of the day, you mentioned about the exposure on possibly the state level here, that he can't wave away with a pardon pad. But if he ever has intentions to run again in 2024, as he's threatening, or moreover, expect, maybe some allowances to go if we want a peaceful transfer at the end of this, scorched earth is going to make that impossible for anyone to look the other way or to give him, if not a pass, maybe a slap on the wrist instead of something else. He's almost ensuring that he's going to get the harshest possible treatment with whatever exposure still exists for him when this is all said and done.
It's not at all clear to me that Donald Trump thinks two moves ahead. This is not a chess player. This is not a checkers player for the most part. He acts on impulse, and of course, you got to give him credit. Through most of his life, those impulses have kept him out of much further trouble than he could have gotten into and enabled him to succeed in breathtaking ways. But I agree with you that you can push this too far, and especially if we reach a point where not only is he resisting all the obvious evidence that he's lost this election and continues to put up frivolous lawsuits that get shot down by judges, and keeps a transfer of power, the transition from moving along peacefully, has his head of the General Services Administration refused to give the access and the money and the housing for the transition team for Biden. But if Americans see him basically blowing up Americans' own interest for his self-interest, that will cost him some support. But let's face it, Richard, an awful lot of what Trump has done, enriching himself at the expense of taxpayers and taking crude and terrible actions at different points, he still got 48% of the American people to vote for him. So I'm not sure he thinks with any more hesitation about what he said 4 years ago, that he could shoot somebody in broad daylight on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. And that's one of the challenges that we face as a country as well, that he may not hesitate to do things that are not going to be good for the rest of us.
You're right. My only thing is things change at the end of January. And if he creates, to go back to Nixon, as we always seem to with this administration, an enemies list that's self-motivated to keep records, if you will, on the way out the door as they get pushed, I don't know how that's going to serve him, even in a self-interested capacity. But Norman, I appreciate a few minutes as always. Thank you so much.
Sure, you bet.
And up next, the sights and the sounds from a historic weekend when we learn that Joe Biden will be our next president.